Massachusetts. So
I'm starting to record it.
Okay.
Remember, I warned you, Brian, that it would be recorded.
and so mainly for the last couple of years, I've been mainly living in Lenox, Massachusetts, but come down to New York City fairly often. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's nice. It's it's one of those, Lenox is one of those little New England villages in the Berkshires, and a lot of hiking and outdoor stuff. So it's
Is it
You
near
were
Stockbridge?
always kind of an outdoorsman, weren't you, Brian?
not, I don't think that much. I mean, I did, I don't know, Tim, you remember our little surfing expeditions down the coast after school each year.
Yeah.
But
Here comes George.
Hey, Ferrick.
hi,
Happy
George.
New Year, Happy New Year, George. Turn on, you're muted, George.
Unmute yourself.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, George.
Hi,
It's been a
Brian.
while. I think I've seen George more recently than any, well, I know I have, than any of you guys, because maybe, what is it, 20 years ago, we or maybe 30 years ago, we crossed paths.
Well, we had lunch. No, it was more recent.
Was it more recent?
Yeah, we were in San Francisco at the Ferry Building.
That's right.
Do you
Yeah.
remember Kathy Ryan?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so we had lunch there. So that must have been somewhere between 2002 and 2012.
That's just like you.
Pretty big bracket, my friend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just like yesterday.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
that time, you were making some films, some radical revolutionary films, I think.
Yeah, still am.
Oh,
Still
yeah,
am.
yeah.
So are George and Ned, is Ned well? Does anybody know? Has he recovered from his Omicron?
Haven't heard for a
I
bit.
don't know.
I
have
know,
heard
I
nothing.
know Crook is still in Maui, isn't he? Yeah, George is still in Maui.
He said he was going to be, yeah.
And so what's the
He
time
joined us
difference?
from there last time.
So what's the time difference between you guys and Maui?
It's about 3 hours, I think.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I was going to call him this morning. I'm glad, because that would be a 6-hour time change and he probably would be pissed off by waking him up so early in the morning.
He might
Those-
be.
Those are typical, that's typical George Crook. That pisses me off. That's one of
Taking
his
up
most
surfing.
memorable.
Maybe George is out surfing this morning.
But he usually says that with a smile.
Yes, he does. That's right.
Yeah.
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 So anyway, Brian, where are you? I miss.
I was just saying, I'm in New York City.
Okay, New York City.
And we had our first winter snow last night, about an inch, not very
Uh-huh.
much.
Ah,
Yeah, the news had that on. I'm in Irvine, have spent most of my life in Southern California, but lots of travel on business over the years.
Oh,
So, and I've got 4 kids, 11 grandkids. Have a good thought today for my son, Steve. He just turned 50, but he's got a very serious cancer surgery on the back of his leg.
oh dear.
He was quite an athlete as a goalkeeper in soccer in high school and beyond. But it's about a 1-hour surgery that's starting about now. So
Okay.
good
And
thoughts
where
for Steve. He's married, has 2 children.
Where does he
He's
live?
He lives in Chino,
Okay.
so also Southern California. His wife is a spectacular woman, businesswoman, general manager for a big contracting company. And Steve is a contractor. He's a repair and remodel, kind of took after my dad. You might remember the machine shop, Gremer Machine and Tool.
Right.
Mhm.
So Steve and my dad were very close. Steve on more construction. And on a very happy note, yesterday, was on the phone with my son, John, number one son, and he and his wife are rehabbing the Gremer family Lazy Days, which is a 38-foot, like 40-year-old model, but
A
they're gonna make it
motorhome?
yeah, Lazy Days motorhome. So they're gonna make it a family anchor. So anyway, that's sort of a quick catch up on me.
And
How
Tim,
they
I
gonna-
see,
are they- Yeah,
Tim, I see you're in San Francisco.
well, I'm staying in an RV park that looks out over the bridge. I just wish I was. Speaking of motorhomes, no, I have an iPad for Christmas. And so I had to download a Zoom app, and I had been using my laptop before, but this iPad, and so it gave me a choice of some background things I could use. And I thought, given Ferrick living up in the Bay Area, that
Yeah.
it might just kind of be nostalgic for him.
Yeah, it seems like you're just hopping
Oh,
a
yeah.
step away. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I was trying to find a beach scene,
Wow.
with good-looking girls walking on the beach, but that was not one of the choices that I was offered.
There's not a lot of that in San
Well,
Francisco.
there is one with palm trees, though.
Yeah,
Oh,
there is.
No, that's a good one you have. That's the iconic bridge.
Well, and so,
Good choice.
Brian, you don't know that Tom lives about a block from the beach in Redondo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm in Redondo and been here for just about a year and a half. Here comes George Crook.
Eh,
We should sing Blue Hawaii when he comes on.
Right, right. Now I see I've got the same.
Aloha.
Yeah, I want to get the
Aloha,
bridge too.
George.
Hey, hey.
Hey, George.
Hi,
Rock
sorry.
surf. How was the surf this morning?
Drolet! As I live and breathe.
I know. Well, some of us are barely living and breathing, but
Yeah, I know. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm, been semi-isolated for the last couple of years, but other than
Oh,
that,
Brian, how's your health?
my health is pretty good. Yeah, I think overall it's good. I had a little stroke a couple of years ago, but
Here's the guy who changed the least. I vote for Lombardi as the one who still looks the most like our high school pictures.
Yeah,
Yeah. Can you, is that Brian?
yeah,
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, guys. I wouldn't recognize you on the street. I have to say that. George, yes, because I've seen George, but
My
Both are
computer, yeah, my computer is very dark. Do I look dark to you all?
No.
Yeah. Well, you look pretty good for an old man. You look okay.
Well, part of the problem is there's more light in the window behind you than there is. on you.
No, my computer, you know what? I'm gonna ring off and come back. I gotta
Okay.
my computer down and start again.
Okay.
Tom,
Okay.
Don't say
All right.
anything. Don't say
Tom, do you
anything.
see that Fred Lawrence is trying to log in?
Yeah,
I
don't
do,
say
and I
anything-
let him in, and
Oh.
he's not coming.
Don't say
Okay.
anything important until I get back.
It says
Okay.
connecting to audio, so
Fear
Fred,
not.
maybe you should know we'll be able to hear, but we don't see yet.
Yeah,
A Crook, has Ned recovered?
Yeah, at least essentially and probably even officially.
Essentially and officially. Sounds like a
Does
lawyer.
that make you expect him to participate today?
Yeah, I'm surprised he's not there.
Aha.
George, I have a favor to ask you.
Okay.
I'm distracted by that fan that's going around and
Oh.
around. So could you
Yeah.
move your screen or turn off the fan?
I thought it would have a Buddhist kind of, sure, of course. Hang on.
It's probably 90 degrees
here
where he
comes
is.
Fred.
No, it's not, actually.
Fred Lawrence.
There's Fred. All right, welcome, Fred.
I almost forgot.
Ah,
Oh, you too, huh?
oh my,
You-
oh
you
my
don't-
goodness, I forgot to send the reminder this morning.
You're excused.
It wasn't your fault.
It came out yesterday, didn't it?
Yeah, Yeah, I did send something yesterday. But, well, here we are. Lombardi is coming back.
So
And,
shall we wait? Let's wait before we
Well,
have our prayer.
yeah, anybody
Well,
have?
I would be curious because it seemed to me, Brian, didn't you follow a lot of what Fred Lawrence was studying back in those high school days, or maybe into college even?
Yeah, and even you know, in the last few years, I've occasionally dipped into things that he's been saying, that you've been saying, Fred. So can't say I'm all that knowledgeable of it, but I did check it out periodically. So
Even I'm not that
yeah,
knowledgeable.
I say you're, you know, I actually still have a copy of Lonergan's Insight on my bookcase, so which I haven't read in, you know, 50 years, but in any case, I still have it.
But Gary, you're much brighter.
Thank you. Yeah, I wish I could.
Good move,
that with
good move.
mine.
So where does everybody live these days?
Okay, well, I'll start. I'm finished soon. I am in Redondo Beach, California. I moved here about 1.5 years ago. I retired about 5.5 years ago. Or is it 6.5 now? I don't know. Time flies when you're having fun. But I was for just about 5 years at Nazareth House, which is an assisted living retirement community. And I did not need assisted living, but I needed a kind of a base for me to do sort of to do my own thing. And it proved good. With COVID, I kind of came to the conclusion that I was more needed with a friend to help her in some of her health problems, and kind of to enjoy each other's company too, and to enjoy the beach down here. And the one condition was that she had a good Wi-Fi, high-speed Wi-Fi, so I could continue doing this kind of stuff. So I'm enjoying an active retirement. And
So the palm trees in your background are real. The
they are
background
real.
for Tim is the artificial one, right?
Yeah, they are real, and they belong actually to the neighbor here. But I think I can move my camera, I hope without too much of a disaster, to show the view from my
Oh,
window.
nice.
so
Oh, yeah.
This is,
So-
that's Palos Verdes in the background. It's a little foggy. And if I go down this way, you could see the ocean if it weren't foggy and there weren't so many buildings in the way. And the
so
big
Tom
ugly-
has a most stereotypically Californian setting,
Yeah,
the
because
way I see it, yeah.
the main part
Yep.
of the view is the roof of a Smart and Final Market. So anyway, that's where I am and kind of what I'm doing.
Well,
So
I am, Brian, for the last 50 years, I've been living in the South. After graduate school, I moved to Athens, Georgia, and taught at the University of Georgia for about 15 years. And then left the university and moved to South Florida and was in the investment business down there. And then 15 years ago, when I retired at 62, so 15 years ago, my wife and I, we moved up to Western North Carolina. We live about 40 miles south of Asheville, just to kind of give you a framework, in the mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains, and kind of a remote area, which is perfectly fine. And we love the mountains. We love the weather. It's 10 degrees out this morning, so I didn't want to have any background that would be too unpleasant to you guys basking in either Hawaii or Napa or Redondo Beach. So I chose this scene of the Bay Bridge. So love North Carolina. Took a long time to get accustomed to Southern culture. But that's a story for another day. Anyway,
Has
so
not
Tommy?
affected your language, however.
well,
Well, he's less profane. Is that what you
Oh,
meant? Ron?
perhaps.
Was I-
Tim, tell us. I just
wait a minute.
realized this.
Wait a minute.
Tell-
What do you mean? Was I ever profane?
Well, you tried. Tell us who your congressman is, Tim.
Fuck off.
I just came across an article about him the other day, and they mentioned Hendersonville, North Carolina.
Well, my previous congressman is the famous Mark Meadows, who maybe, if you follow national news, it
Yes,
was a trusted consigliere to Trump. And the young guy I've got now is the youngest congressman ever, I think. He turned 25 and was elected. And he's a complete doofus. He's been caught carrying a weapon into the airport. I mean, but he thinks Trump is the new Messiah. He truly thinks that. And it's amazing to me that in my neighborhood, probably half the people in the neighborhood voted for these guys. And so you have to be careful in the South.
Here comes Ned under the guise
Yeah.
of Darlene.
Hey, Darlene.
Hello, Darlene.
Orale.
Hi, everybody. Forgive me for being so late.
Well, hey, dude. So Tim, favor us with this guy's name, because Brian at least will recognize it.
His name is Cawthorne, Cawthorne. Yeah,
Madison, right?
Madison Cawthorne. Yeah, named after one of the founding fathers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but that's
Good.
enough. That's enough Southern politics.
Also, Madison, by the way, was also a slaveholder, so it's in the right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They all were, Ryan.
Ned, are you feeling well? Ned, are you recovered?
Yes and no. Hey, is that Brian?
Yep, it is.
There you go.
Brian, it's so good to see you. Good, great.
I think the last time I saw you was you sang at my father's funeral. Do you remember that?
Wow, that's a long time ago. Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, that's a long time
Sure.
ago.
What a good guy he was, boy.
I loved your father, Brian.
Yeah, he
Your dad.
Special
your dad-
family, really special family.
Yeah, no question about it.
So when did your dad die, Brian?
98 or something like that, maybe 96. I can't remember. I've got a card somewhere that tells me the date. Actually, Tom
Us
said,
too, yes.
Is it a card from him?
yeah, from his funeral, but Tom sent me a list today of about 20 things that happen as you approach 80 or cross the line, which I think we should probably share. I have to admit that the cause of him sending that to me was, he said I didn't have to tell you, but so I
just said I wouldn't tell.
I know you wouldn't tell. I do these Zooms with my siblings since the COVID started once a week. And so that lasted till about midnight last night. And I knew that I had a call, another call about 10 o'clock this morning. And somehow I converted all of that into thinking that I was 3 hours ahead of you, behind you rather. So when you were at 10 o'clock, I of course would be at 7 o'clock. So I got up 6:30, turned on the
my.
computer, and nobody was there. So
So if you doze off, we'll understand.
Yeah, so I went back to bed.
Brian, where do you
So
live?
at 7:04 our time, I get this email from Brian, where the hell are you guys? Something like that.
Well, it reminded me of I don't know if you guys remember my youngest brother, Steve, who has Down syndrome. Steve used to call me up. He had, he really struggled to understand this time difference thing, but he always had it reversed like I did this morning. So, he'd call me up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to chat. Or after my mom died, they got him enrolled in Saddleback College, and he took a sculpture class and a class in Russian history. So he would call me up with these names he could barely pronounce at 3 o'clock in the morning and wanted to know if they were good guys or bad guys.
Brian, where do you live?
Either or, right?
I felt a lot like Steve this morning when when I called at 7 o'clock.
Brian, where do you live? Where do you live?
I live
How's
in
he doing health-wise?
huh?
How's he doing cognitively and health? I just learned, Brian, I don't know if you knew this. I was engaged the last, 20 years of practicing law in disability stuff for kids in the school systems,
Yeah.
IEPs and so forth. And I just learned recently, and Ned, maybe you knew this, but people with Down syndrome are now living much longer than would have been expected, say, when Steve was born.
Yes.
But they are victims of early cognitive impairment.
Yeah.
All that stuff sets in much earlier than it does with neurotypical people.
Yeah. Well, I
Have you found
remember.
that?
Yeah, no, I remember one time you came to some family event we had, and you came, and my sister Bonnie, who was a principal of the school,
I remember that.
was dealing with all this, where does the funding go and all this kind of stuff. And you were on one side and she was on the other side, sort of. I remember that. But Steve is 60. He turned 60 this year. He's in his final decline, I think. He's in hospice. We were out there in about a month ago to spend a week with him. And he's pretty incapacitated at this point. He can't really respond verbally, and but he's still, there's still that spark of the old guy still there. You can still get a smile out of him, and poke fun at him, and he pokes back a little bit. But yeah, he's 60 is pretty much the far edge of Down syndrome lifespan at this point. And there's an interesting article that I saw this morning someplace that there's been some research at MIT. There's a lab at MIT that focuses on Down syndrome issues. And for a long time, there's been a connection between Alzheimer's and Down syndrome. The protein buildups in the brain, which is what's happening to Steve. I mean, it's basically that the proteins kind of eat your brain in a way, but now they've made a connection between what they call, I forget the word, but, dead cells that aren't dead, but they're senile cells, and the body absorbs them. But if it doesn't absorb them, and it tends not to absorb them at the right pace, they tend to clog up and clamp other cells in your DNA, and so there's more research going on about it, but they've done some initial experimentation that is far from being something that they're recommending for any kind of human test at this point, but they've found some chemicals that can be injected that actually remove those senile cells, and it could have a relationship to not just Down syndrome, but the cognitive abilities of Down syndrome people. Maybe when they're early on in life, there might be something, but also it could have some impact on Alzheimer's and longevity. Maybe we'll all live to be 180, who knows?
No, no, thanks.
But anyway, he's doing good. We're gonna go out again to LA and all things being equal at the end of February and spend some time with him.
So Brian, where do you live?
I live in New York City.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've been in New York since 94, I think, 1994. And so that my wife Kathy and I got divorced in 86, but I got remarried in 2012, I think. And my wife has for a couple decades had a house up in Lenox, Massachusetts. So I've spent most of the pandemic up there staying away from people. So and it's nice. There's a lot of hiking, so you can be outdoors without being in crowds,
Is it true your New York address is on Park Avenue?
No, it's on 79th Street.
But
But
you have
it
a
is,
doorman?
I do have a doorman, yes, actually.
Cool. Every revolutionary needs a doorman,
My nephew's Christmas a couple of years ago made a booklet that they gave me at Christmas that said the life and times of the communist on the Upper East Side. Right? But I told Barbara that if she ever gets tired of me and throws me out, well, I'm perfectly fine with just sitting up a cardboard box, in front of the building because I'm friends with the doorman and I'm sure they'd let me be there.
You can get away with it.
Does he have a uniform?
Do I have a uniform?
No. I know you. Come on. Does the doorman?
Oh yeah, they have uniforms. Most of the doormen in New York have uniforms, and they also have one of the strongest unions in the city. It's just kind of interesting. Yeah, so they're good people. They're extremely helpful and to a lot of people.
I'm gonna have to process Brian on the Upper East Side with a uniformed doorman, but I can handle it.
Yeah, we have, for years we did what we called salons once a month from September to May, and it'd be all kinds of things. We political, literature, music, whatever, but usually with a pretty left-wing orientation. And so I don't know if you guys know this television show Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. I don't know if anybody's
I
seen
do.
it. It's very, very kind of progressive show. And so she's an old friend of mine. And so we had a event here with the Lebanese composer, Marcel Khalife. And so she was going to interview him. So I gave her the address. She gets up here and she goes, "You live here?" So I said, well, the essence of revolution is resolving contradictions. So I'm in the middle of a big one. So
Good for you. Good for you. That's great. Brian, I've always been curious. There was back in high school a serious, I think it was a knee injury that you suffered. You were a star football player for a
I
while.
wouldn't say that. I definitely would not say that,
Yeah, I
Well,
would
as a
either,
teammate, I thought so. Anyway, but that injury seemed to turn your life a bit from kind of mainstream to much more academic. Is that about right?
I don't think it's related to the injury. I actually now have a knee replacement in that knee, which I got 10 years ago, I guess. But no, I don't think that was it. When I left the seminary, I think it was after the second year of theology. I can't remember exactly. I think that.
Did you go that? I was going to ask you, when did you leave seminary?
Yeah, I think I left after second year of theology. And
So did you get any orders? Do you receive any
yeah,
orders?
I got tonsure and acolyte, I think.
Okay. Okay.
I
I
wanted
just
to,
didn't.
I wanted to get exorcist. I don't remember if I did or not. I don't think I did it. Because I was thinking of making that a profession, but you know, anyway. So, but when I left the seminary, I went to, I was working in summers in Mexico with a priest I knew in San Francisco, and he had a thing called the Latin American Mission Program. So
Same one that Charlie Herbalin worked with,
yeah,
Father Deebles.
Father Deebles, yep.
Yeah.
So so anyway, so that I think after that summer I left the seminary, I did go to Mexico and worked with him that summer. And then I went up to Vina, California, to a Trappist monastery for 6 months.
Wow. Yeah.
And just lived there because I didn't know what the hell I was going to do, you know. And then I went down to San Francisco and got a master's in theology at USF.
Wow.
And that's when my life changed, actually, because I met all kinds of people. And I mean, I'd always been against the Vietnam War, but you know, I met activists, and I met, you know, I got into another environment of people who I thought, you know, kind of exemplified the you know, sort of finest virtues and ideals, most of whom weren't at all religious, and a lot of whom were actually atheists. You know, young, we were all young, you know, but that was kind of that 1980s San Francisco environment, you know. So
I remember, Brian, coming up to see you once, and off I went with you to an anti-Vietnam lecture given by no less an eminence than the young Michael Novak,
yeah,
who was in his left-wing theologian phase,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Didn't last too long, but there he was.
yeah. Yeah, so so that's what I did. Mainly became an anti-war activist in San Francisco. I had actually been accepted in the I think it was kind of a theology philosophy program at the University of Chicago for a doctorate, and I needed a job in the interim, so I applied for some kind of a housing counseling job with, it might have been with whatever preceded HUD or whatever. And so I just finished reading this book, Reveille for Radicals.
Oh, yeah.
So I was kind of hyped up on that. So I went for my interview, and so the woman after the interview, she said, well, what would you like to do? What kind of job would you like to have? And I said, you know, I could do anything. I said, you want me to be head of the program? I'll do that. You want me to be the janitor? I'll sweep the floor, whatever. I can do any of those things, right? So she pauses and she said, well, let me go talk to my boss. And she comes back and she said, you know, Mr. Drolet, I think the problem is you're overeducated and underskilled. So at that point, I decided to skip the University of Chicago and focus on developing some skills.
Just a news item, Brian, speaking of Solinsky. Michael died. Why am I blanking on his last name? Clements. Mike Clements, who spent New Year's morning, spent from age 20 forward as a community organizer and other such things.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, at the last I saw him, I think he was one of the pallbearers at John Cofield's funeral with me, and I think that's the last time I saw him. But I remember he was deeply into it at that point.
Yeah,
what
never,
wound up
never
doing, Brian?
wavered, never flinched.
Gary, you have something to say.
No, I just wanted to ask what, I don't know all you did with your life. I'm interested. You're just getting into it. What did you finally end up doing?
Plumber. He became a plumber.
No.
A lot of money in that.
Skills, find skills.
Yeah, he was looking for those missing skills.
I have you probably don't know, I have a mega church in Santa Ana.
Saddleback.
Actually, I'll tell you a funny story though. I mainly the last 20 years I've made documentary films, kind of left-wing documentary films. I was the director of a nonprofit called Deep Dish TV in New York. And before that, I worked at a television station in Boulder, Colorado called Free Speech TV. Now I forgot what the funny story I was going to tell you, but
Any primary funding resources?
most of my, well, yeah, I mean, it's all hand to mouth fundraising. You get a few, maybe, decent sized grants from individuals, and then everything else is nickel dime, but we did a lot of interesting stuff. And I also worked at a company called Voyager, which was one of the early new media companies. They also, a friend of mine, Bob Stein, had started Voyager, and also the Criterion collection of movies, which is kind of a high-end collection that you can stream. But while I was at Voyager, I did a CD-ROM, which was kind of a passing media platform on this, but I would consider a political prisoner in Pennsylvania, Mumia Abu Jamal. And so I spent, a year or so working on that and talking with him. And then at Deep Dish, I don't know, we did a lot of stuff on the Middle East. I did a 12-part series on the Iraq War called Shocking and Awful. We did 5 or 6 other things on the Iraq War, and kind of the background of it, the sources of it, So, I mean, that was kind of what I've done, I'm working on a documentary now on an artist here in New York, Susan Kreil, who sort of became radicalized during the first Gulf War and went to Iraq and walked among the oil fires of Iraq that I think it's unclear, but probably Saddam Hussein's boys set on fire. And she did these incredibly wall-sized paintings of these fires that just blow you away. And then since then, she's done a series on Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. And so we're doing an hour-long documentary on her. And
What's her name, Brian? Again, Susan
Kreil, Krile. Yeah, you can. It's her work is very interesting.
Uh-huh.
And then the other project I'm working on, it's been a 5 or 6 year project. It's still, I probably got 5 or 6 years to go, but it's called An American Nightmare, and it's subtitled Black Labor and Liberation. And it looks at slavery and now, right? What's in common, and basically look at slaves as what they were, a labor force that was absolutely necessary to basically black hands picking cotton underwrote the Industrial Revolution in the United States and Europe, and was responsible for most of the technological innovations of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And today, where that labor force is actually not at all necessary and is marginalized economically. And so what do you do with, 20 or so million people who don't have any particularly useful economic role in your society? So that's what that project is about, but it's not easy to do. It's because a lot of stuff you think you don't know, and you have to figure it out, So anyway,
I have a question I'd like to ask Brian about that. Has any of this research of yours uncovered a connection between, that's what I would say, United States slavery and cotton, and the very, very widespread Caribbean slavery and sugarcane, because sugar was also one of the driving forces of the economic and cultural development of Europe, because they had this cheap, high demand product.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting research on that. If you, particularly, the British slave trade to Barbados and Jamaica, same thing, it was the wealth that underwrote the economic development. Yeah, I mean, actually, there were probably 10 million Africans who were plucked from Africa and made it to the quote New World. Probably another 5 million or more died in transit, aren't counted, that were just thrown overboard. But most of those enslaved people went to South America, went to Brazil and Colombia and to the Caribbean. And there was only maybe 500,000 that came to the United States. And eventually, I think by the time of the Civil War, there were about 4 million enslaved people in the US. So I mean, it's a big picture of where people went, what they did,
We've had the number of occasions living down here, to go and visit some extremely well-preserved plantations who have taken it upon themselves to do rich history of their slaves that they've held. And I actually said something to Crook about this in a week or so ago. There's this particular plantation up the river from New Orleans in Louisiana that they have, through the philanthropy of the people who own the plantation, they have researched every single slave that they had on that plantation. And over the course of the years of about 40 years, 50 years, they had over 10,000 slaves that they could document living on their plantation. And it's the most eye-opening thing to actually go to a slave plantation museum. And the sadness for me, particularly for Sandra, was the kind of unfortunate role that the Catholic Church in Louisiana played in the whole slave ship business.
Say more, please.
Every slave had to be baptized in Louisiana, and yet they were not. And yet the laws that were established is they could never be taught to read. I mean, if a slave was in this one plantation, if a slave was caught reading anything, they cut off one hand. so they couldn't hold a book any longer.
Jeez.
And it was a tearful, this is a very tearful situation for Sandra and me to see how the church rationalized and justified the enslavement of these people. But pagan babies, I don't know. I remember in grade school, we used to the nuns used to take up a collection for the pagan babies.
Right.
You put
I
a
remember
penny
that.
in a little offering thing, and what it was going to do, it was going to get them baptized, but who gave a shit if they starved to death? And so it was a period of church history that I was completely, and not, I'm not educated the way you guys were, and maybe you were all fully aware of the role of the church in black
Nope.
slavery.
Yeah.
No,
But
No,
It's
oh, I
equally
didn't,
shocking.
because I thought maybe, as you guys were going through college and theology, that there would have been a really good focus on church history. And I don't mean, the early fathers of the church, but I thought kind of like the role of the church in, contemporary society. And so
What church were you part of that you thought that?
well, thank you. Yeah, I remember. No, yeah. And so you're talking about slavery, Brian, just kind of, I can't get that image out of our minds of going to this plantation, and they've got 10,000 grave markers of all of the slaves that had been on that plantation and had died, and they knew the name of every one of them. They knew what nation in Africa they came from. It is the most fabulous thing. But as I said, the sad part, maybe sad is not the right emotion I had. Terribly discouraged, kind of like, what were these church fathers thinking? What were they thinking? And what was going through their mind? Did their racism just overwhelm every other thought process they had? I don't know.
Let me tell you a story that in the days of Bartholomew de las Casas, I now I'm lost track of dates, but there was a council of the church in Salamanca. And I think part of it ended up being in Burgos. I went through Burgos and went to a library in Spain where the documents from that council were kept. And the debate that went on for almost 2 years, this council lasted, I think, for about 2 years, posed the question, did the indigenous peoples of the Americas have souls? And Bartholomew de las Casas was one of the people arguing that, in fact, they did have souls. And eventually, at the end of the conference, the bishops agreed that yes, indeed, the indigenous people do have souls. Now, the reality was that by that time, the entire population of indigenous peoples of the Americas had been pretty much eradicated. And the estimate is that when Columbus arrived, there were something like 60 million people in South and North America, mostly in South America. But the corollary to that conference, because they had just started to import African slaves, so this must have been in the like 1620s, 1650s. The corollary was that Africans do not have souls. So that was a conclusion of the bishops of the Catholic Church in the 1620s or 50s, and so it's not surprising that in Louisiana in the 1840s or whatever it was, that would still be the outlook,
Brian, the council explicitly held that Africans do not have souls.
Yes.
That was one of their, in legal talk, one of their findings or conclusions.
Yeah.
Well,
that would have been a local council in
Local council
Spain.
members, yeah.
No, it wasn't a local council of Spain. It was bishops from several different countries. I can't remember who all was in
But
attendance.
not a
It
ecumenical.
wasn't there was representatives from the Vatican, but it
Mhm.
wasn't a Vatican conference, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
My memory on this is pretty foggy, but there's research that's been done on this. I think there's a good book called American Holocaust by David Standard that I don't remember if it's in that book, but you can research this.
What's the name of the council?
Well, the council was held in Salamanca initially, and then I think in Burgos in Spain. And I don't remember the name of the council, but it's, you can research its stuff online.
parallel with the church thing, I think in the area of science. A few years ago, I read a book called Descartes' Bones. Anybody hear about that book? It was kind of a philosophical, historical book written about Descartes, but in eugenics, there were scientists that would analyze human skulls and then conclude about their degree of humanness too. So I think that goes along with what you're saying, Brian and Tim, that there was some scientific thinking that Africans and others were less because of the shape of their skulls, and they had the ideal skull, of course, was an Aryan, Caucasian, European skull.
Yeah.
And then
They were still doing that in the Third Reich, and they had tools.
Yeah.
well,
for
there
the
were some
measurement of the skull.
Americans involved too. I found out a fact that at an eminent high school where my wife taught, Polytechnic High in Pasadena, has a place called, I don't know if they've renamed it Gosney Hall, but Gosney was a eugenicist, or, that we're proposing racial theories of intelligence and so forth. So I think religion went along with science too. They were kind of feeding off of each other because the church controlled science a lot, and they, so that's another angle of it.
Well, it wasn't just the church. I worked at the Museum of Natural History in New York for a few years, and that was the center of eugenics research in the
Was it
United States.
really?
And they still have a significant library, which is very difficult to get to, of the eugenics work that they did. And this was before, before the Nazis in Germany. So,
Well, the Nazis modeled their racial laws on the race codes of the South in the United States. They had lawyers coming over here and studying.
That's right.
Our racial rules, in the Southern states. The not one drop rule. I mean, our codes, our racial codes were worse than those of the Third Reich in terms of, I can't remember what they called it, but like one drop of black blood would make you black.
Yeah.
In the South, and in the Third Reich, you could be an eighth Jewish, and you were considered non-Jewish.
So are we getting into critical race theory here?
Yeah.
Which is,
it's also
which is, which means bringing parts of history. Tim, as you're talking, it seems like a part of history was brought out to the foreground that was way in the background, right? And it's true for all of us. I remember Howard Zinn, didn't he write a book about history, kind of the underside of human history? And I think in trying to bring this out, some people are trying to just give it a label and say we shouldn't talk about these things. But in essence, we're just talking about bringing to the fore what actually went on by your bringing up this council. That's something we were not taught in the seminary or in theology. How did you come across it?
That's why I asked the question about what your guys' learning experiences were like in college, because you all stayed together all through college, and then, you know, some of you for quite a few years after that. I was just wondering about
Well,
the degree of that.
Well,
You
Fred,
know,
could you-
just real quickly, I remember sitting next to Brian in Latin composition class. And there was Rudy Miller up there doing his thing, and I thought he was a doofus, you know, I mean, whatever. And Brian and I were writing notes to each other, because Brian was doing a term paper on anti-Semitism and the church, I think. For
In Latin,
Carnegie.
he was doing this in Latin.
I wasn't doing it in Latin.
Well, nobody was paying attention to the class.
Yeah,
At least the two of us were. And he was sending me these notes and would hand me this book he was reading. And the thrust of his commentary was that the Nazis got their ideas from us about the Jews. And I was sitting there, you probably don't remember this, Brian, but I was sitting there saying, bullshit. You know, they were a common enemy. They didn't like us. They, you know, what are you talking about? We didn't do that. The Nazis did that. Oh yeah, here John Chrysostom said X, George. Saint Athanasius said Y, George. Here's the quote. And I go, oh fuck. You know, I mean, it was
Yeah.
just really appalling stuff.
If you go, I don't know if anybody still does any of this, but if you go read the results of the Fourth Lateran Council, which was an
Well,
official
I actually have.
council of the Catholic Church.
That's where the yellow star came.
Yep. That's where they declared that Muslims and Jews had to wear distinctive marking. It became yellow pieces of cloth, which eventually evolved into the yellow star, to distinguish them from the Christians, particularly so that there wouldn't, you know, good Christian girls and boys would know right away that, you know, they should stay away from these people and not, you know, get too engaged with them, or certainly not marry them. But, you know, that was an official declaration of the Fourth Lateran Council. So
oh, Brian, what was the date of that, or approximately? what
it was
century?
like 12 something, 1250.
Innocent the Third, right?
Yeah, can you comment on this? Because it's interesting, because there is a period in Spanish history where the Jews and the Muslims and the Catholics kind of were mutually respectful, and culture flourished there. And then somebody came into power in the church, and then Jews had to either leave or become Catholic, and Muslims were
Well,
pushed
Ferdinand
back.
Roosevelt.
Yeah, do you recall that? Does anybody else recall?
I
reading
know a
about
little
that?
bit, I know a little bit of that history,
You know,
because basically the Muslims controlled Spain. From here, some easy dates to remember: 711 to 1492. And that was what was called generally a period of convivencia, where under Muslim control, the Christians and Jews were well tolerated and even could achieve considerable standing in their society. Now, you know, there were ups and downs. There were periods of what would seem to be persecution. But, you know, once the Spaniards got their stuff together in the union of Ferdinand and Isabella, you know, they developed enough power to be able to expel the Muslims and the Jews.
And that was a really brilliant move for the Kingdom of Spain.
Yeah, and as the and I forget his name, but as the Sultan in of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Sultan said, you know, how he found it inconceivable that with one stroke of a pen, a ruler could simultaneously impoverish his own kingdom and enrich his kingdom.
Yeah, get rid of your
by
civil
expelling the
servants.
Jews, because they were very well welcomed into the Ottoman Empire.
Tom, was that propelled by a particular pope too? It seems like,
Well,
I had
I'm-
the sense that somebody came into power. It
Well,
was
I would
unusual.
think that the popes would uniformly, support the victory of Christians over
Right.
Muslims.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the popes by and large were a moderating force in medieval anti-Semitism, I understand. They were,
Yeah.
this was more nationalistically based than it was the Pope.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
don't know about that.
I would suspect that Italy, didn't quite have the mixtures of, say, Jews and Christians that you might find, say, north of the Alps, or perhaps in Spain. So they could be a little more tolerant, I think. And maybe they brought a little more religion to it. I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
I think, I mean, this would require some research, but I think there was also probably a bigger force, which was the early formation of nation states. And part of that dynamic has always been to identify who belongs to the nation state and who doesn't. I mean, we can see that today in our own situation, where there's, I mean, somebody mentioned the critical race theory, but, the question of who's a real American, well, the real Americans are the white Christians, obviously, and all these other people don't actually, they're not indigenous to the national project. And my guess is that that was somewhat an element in the the persecution and the, because there was, there was battle going on to push the.
And I think really there was something else going on that may be more fundamental, and that is the very human, sadly, human need of human communities to find scapegoats. And to, if we have any kind of a problem in our society, it's their fault. And they are the other. And therefore we eliminate them, reduce them to whatever second class status or whatever. But scapegoating, I think, it has been a tremendously hidden force in much of human history.
Well, I have two things to say here. One, I talked before, George, I don't know if you were in the group yet, but yeah, you were, about when Betty and I went to Sicily and found under the Norman rule in Sicily in the 12th century. The relationships among Catholics, Byzantines, Muslims, and Jews were extraordinary. They were extraordinarily tolerant. And you've got these great churches in Sicily with quotations from the Quran on some of the pillars of the churches that were inscribed there when the church was dedicated. And the Monreale has more mosaics, had more mosaics per square foot installed by Byzantine craftsmen than any church in Christendom except St. Sophia's. And it was just a remarkable century of tolerance and goodwill in Sicily. And
that was what century, George?
I believe the 12th.
Okay.
King Roger of Sicily. And I think there were 2 Rogers. And it was just extraordinary. John Julius Norwich has a very good book on that thing. Oh, the other thing is, yeah, the Muslims were not so cool otherwise. We've traveled in the Balkan states recently, and the Muslim rule there was very harsh. Like one reason the Bulgarians were the most enthusiastic members of the Warsaw Pact was they were grateful to the Russians in for having in the 19th century intervened in their history and kicked out the Turks.
Mhm.
And it was pretty rough to be. Now that was Orthodox Christianity, not us. I don't know why. I mean, assuming they were more tolerant of us in Western Europe than of the Greeks and the Bulgarians, Romanians, etc. I don't know why that would be so, but
Well, there just ain't nobody innocent in any of them.
nowhere.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, what might have been a relatively tolerant rule may depend an awful lot on the submission of the people who are second class.
Well, could be, sure.
And once they get tired of it and stop being submissive, they get fiercely repressed. And
Yeah.
all
I
that kind
remember,
of thing.
speaking of American slavery and Catholicism, Herbert telling Ned and me about the Pius IX learned that the Jesuits owned slaves, specifically for Georgetown. But throughout their Maryland province, they owned slaves. And apparently Pius went through the roof and fired off whatever it would be called to the Jesuits, saying, we are informed, blah, 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 free those slaves. This is intolerable. What did they do? They ignored it, figuring, that's the way you deal with Rome. So Pius finds out X years later that it hadn't happened and just throws a fit and sends another letter saying, free those slaves. I told you, whatever. And so what the Jesuits do, they said, well, we're busted. I mean, what can we do? So they sold the slaves. Sold them south, as the expression went.
Right.
So go figure. But
So-
Jorge, I don't think there's unique evil in Catholicism when it comes to
No.
these.
Yeah.
But there's no real unique good in Catholicism either when it comes to this kind of thing.
Well, now that's probably true, isn't it?
Yeah, at least in practice. Maybe
Oh, well,
maybe in the very best of our theory, we can look back and put a gloss on it. I don't know, but
Did the Anglicans of the North generate a Peter Claver and a De Las Casas and all that? I don't know.
that's interesting.
So
It-
Brian, how do you see this coming to terms with today? You made some allusion that this is what's going on now. Yesterday, I heard a little bit of the news, about January 6th and historians making some comments. And did any of you see some comments about, was it Senator Thurman back in 1865 that was beat almost to death by 3 other Congress people of the opposite party?
Oh, that was Summers, I think.
Summers, yes. Yeah,
Correct.
Summers, yeah.
Excuse
kind
me,
of
but
saying,
I just got a message from Johnny Gremer that he lost his connection. He's having connection problems.
oh, okay.
So maybe he'll get back.
But instead of people being horrified at what happened to Summers, they even took pieces of the cane that he used to hit him with and wore them as relics almost, and made him into a hero. Certain people did, kind of similar to what's the different reactions toward January the 6th. And Brian, are you going to do a documentary about that?
I hope you do, Brian.
There's actually been, no,
Yeah, but is one needed?
no, I'm not gonna do it on January 6th, but well, it's a big, long discussion. I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting is the power of ideology. Marx, kind of following Hegel, had this notion that, being determines consciousness, but that consciousness can also transform being. And it even goes back to the, why is it? Where did this come from that everybody thinks that they have the direct line to their God or to the God and know exactly what the rules are, and if you don't believe the way I do, then you don't, you're a heretic or whatever. Where did that all come from? What's the
Yeah.
what's the source in human?
Well, now, wait a minute, Brian. How
Yeah.
could you as a Marxist single out all the Christians for that criticism?
No, it's not just Christians, it's everybody.
Okay.
I mean, and the Christians and the Muslims had a certain messianic dimension to them, which the Jews, for the most part, don't have. Although there's a theory that there was a messianic branch of Judaism that left Israel after the destruction of the temple by the Romans and ended up in Central Asia and created a kingdom that was.
I thought it was Missouri.
Yeah, later in Missouri. But anyway, that's a thesis of a professor at the University of Tel Aviv, that basically the current inhabitants of Israel, who are mainly Ashkenazi Jews, actually don't have any Semitic blood in them, that they're actually all converts, the descendants of converts from Central Asia. But anyway, but in general, the Jews are not as, conversion oriented or so, there's obviously sects everywhere. But I've always found that interesting question about, how our ideology can color our perception of reality, when we're supposed to be kind of reality-based creatures. We learn to distinguish poison fruit from non-poison fruit, you know what I mean? And which branches we could swing from safely and which we couldn't, so what happened to that kind of reality-based orientation that still exists in the sciences, but doesn't seem to exist in a lot of other areas of human society? So it's just a question that I have. And I mean, I think just what's going on today, it fundamentally, in my view, it has to do with international relations. In other words, the United States has been the top dog in the world for almost 100 years, and it's now being seriously challenged for the first time for that position. And you've got two camps within the United States arguing over strategy about how to maintain or regain that hegemonic position. And each political orientation, each strategy needs a political base. And so on the one hand, you've got the Trump forces have their strategy of kind of punch them in the face. And they've played to this basically white supremacist, male patriarchal factions within American society, whereas the other side is, no, we have more alliances with our friends, and that's how we're going to, beat the Chinese back. And they're appealing to, the more progressive forces within society to get behind that strategy. It's a much more longer, complicated discussion, but I think that's more that's the dynamic force that's going on now.
So how many of you guys have any Trump supporters as friends?
Oh, of course.
I have quite a few, actually.
I would think your
one.
parish,
In my
Gary, is
family, in my family. So
are you in your family?
sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My
Well, we
brother,
know how those Italian ethnics
my
are.
brother at Thanksgiving called me, "You're so fucking stupid." At which point I sort of clammed up. And I haven't talked to him since, but I will. So there you go.
What about your parish, Gary? Is it
Oh, yeah,
conservative?
you've got people. Oh, sure. There, Brian, I live north of San Francisco. And
Where are you?
Petaluma.
Napa.
Oh, you're in Petaluma.
We know
Okay.
Petaluma, and our diocese is Santa Rosa Diocese.
Yeah.
And, we are currently ruled by a right-wing ideologue bishop who we've been so unfortunate to have for the last 7 years. And he's certainly left his stamp on our diocese. But it's more liberal, obviously, out here. You know, San Francisco, I mean, the West Coast. But no, you still have a lot of people who are very, very conservative. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Tom, you had started out with one, if I can just kind of bring it, is that Brian kind of asked what people had been up to. So maybe we ought to go around and, you know, with Fred and George and Ned and Gary, and kind of fill Brian in on what's been going on with our lives.
That would be interesting.
well, I'll just finish up. I left, Brian, I forget, you left in the second year of theology. Is that when it was, you said?
Yeah, I left after second year.
But then at the end of my 4 years, I held off from becoming a deacon in our fourth year. I went through a kind of personal crisis of conscience and confidence, things like that. I had no experience in parish life whatsoever. I wasn't as holy as I thought priests should be. I was probably at the same level as when I'd come in, you know, and I had this idea that you had to be, well, I wasn't what I thought I was supposed to be, but I went through that for a bit, and I held off from becoming a deacon. And later on, I said, this is crazy. Nobody else is ready either. So then I applied to get ordained, and then, you know, and Cardinal McIntyre didn't accept it. I eventually found a different diocese. I came up, my class got ordained, George, you got ordained, Tom got ordained, and I guess I was getting ready to start the perpetual subdiaconate. I don't know, but I came to Santa Rosa, and within a few months I was ordained to the priesthood, and I've been up here ever since. And I just love listening to you all. I said, I don't know much about history or anything else. It's like going to school. I'm learning an awful lot. But one thing the priesthood has shown me is that you need to break out of that mold that you were trained in. And Tim, you know, it's no surprise to me. I mean, we were none of us learned any of that kind of stuff that really, as you say, George, is the real history that went on about where the church played. Obviously, there were people that knew it, but my life has been pastoral. You know, I've just worked in parishes all my life, and I'm retired 4 years ago, and I'm very happy. Although I have a funeral this afternoon, so I dipped my toe in the water, and I'm saying mass in the parish this weekend to help cover for a priest friend of mine who wants to take a couple of days off. But I dip my toe in the water, and then I walk away, and I come home and have 2 Negronis in the evening and a wonderful quiet dinner.
Well, it sounds like being a grandparent, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
George, I told parishes, I said, you know what? I said, one of the joys of being retired is that I finally, I was at St. Vincent's in Petaluma for 24 years. I said, so now when priests ask me to help out in their parish, I can come and meet new communities. And I said, it's so nice to be able to celebrate with you without having to be responsible for you. And a lot of people have said that's like being a grandparent. So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did you, Gary, did you happen to know a woman by the name of Muriel Bertucci in
oh
Petaluma?
gosh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I worked with
Muriel, you know
Yeah.
Muriel.
I know them very well. They,
And you know her, huh? Dorothy, did you know her mother-in-law, Dorothy Bertucci?
no, I just know John and Muriel.
Yes.
John
Oh,
worked with me at Free Speech TV in Boulder for a while.
Muriel, ecclesiologically, liturgically, theologically, and I would not be on the same.
Right, no, she's quite conservative.
Yes, she is, but a wonderful person.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah. Oh gosh, isn't that funny? Yeah. She's parishioner.
Small world.
Parishioner, yeah. Yeah.
And
May
so
I
Ferrick,
interject a question
Yeah.
just to Brian? And I know this is out of the biography context, but Brian, the weird thing to me about the present plight of the United States is the so-called right, you know, Trump, et cetera. It's not in any way income-based, or it doesn't seem to be. I mean, you have working class people that are spouting this virulent
Mhm.
republicanism, for want of a better word. I know that's not quite accurate, but you know what I mean? It's cultural and not, or as Fred says, it's my tribe kind of loyalty. It's not country club Republicans, who were doing so much evil out there. What about that?
Well, that's a long discussion. Maybe we could have a separate session on it, but
I'll call you up.
I think, historically, going back to the slavery period, I mean, you might be a dirt poor white semi-peasant farmer, but at least you were white. You were one of our guys, right? And so there's always been that aspect of whiteness being a bond between class, right? Which is completely fictional. And it's been a tool of exploitation, but it's actually been a long historical reality, and I think it's still at play today. And so, a part of that, I think part of it is the white supremacy, patriarchalism that still exists strongly in parts of the American working class. The other thing is that, while there was tremendous union organizing and multiracial union organizing in the South, in the 30s, 40s, and to some extent into the 50s, that trade unionism was pretty much smashed in the southern part of the United States. So that had a factor, and then I think another element it is just the realization that the Democratic Party hasn't done shit for the working class, and people know that, and there's and now both the Democrats and Republicans are talking about being parties of the working class, you know what I mean? But they're both parties of the capitalist class, and they have different strategies on how to build a base. But it's more complicated than I'm saying, but I do think there's those kinds of aspects to it. But I think a lot of this there needs to be a lot more on the ground research and investigation, and just going out and talking to people to try and understand where they're coming from, and the other aspect of it is deep in the American DNA is individualism and libertarianism, and it goes so deep, and it cuts across all classes and all ethnic groups. And I think it was there kind of from the beginning. And so, for me, the whole thing was summed up by a sign I saw at the early days of the pandemic. And it was probably somewhere in the mid-Atlantic states. I can't remember. And it was a older middle-aged couple. She was like a little bit of a dumpy housefrau looking woman, and he was a kind of thin, scraggly looking guy with a black cowboy hat on. And between them, they're carrying a sign that said, "Your health will not impinge on my freedom."
Right.
And I thought that pretty much summed it up, that anything that's collectivist or looks to the collective common good that isn't my immediate good is something I don't want to have anything to do with. And I think the ruling classes in this country have promoted that from the very beginning, because it's an effective tool for keeping people separated and fighting one another for the scraps, rather than looking at the source of their own exploitation and oppression.
And doesn't that spill over to the term socialist? Anybody that wants to do something for other people, you
anybody
just
that has
label them communist or socialist?
Yeah, anybody that has a collectivist, framework.
Yeah, but what about this paradox? As you're talking, how can there be six? What's the role of sports in our society? you can have at the Chase Center where the Warriors play in San Francisco, 16,000 white people cheering 10
Black-
people of color running around on the basketball court. What the heck's going on there? Or you can have Raider fans who are probably super Trumpists going to see the Raiders, of which the star players will be black. Are they colorblind or what?
No, I think the gladiators,
What's the role of sports in our society?
Romans used to watch the gladiators kill each other too.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's like in the South, the SEC universities. I mean,
yeah,
all of their players are black. I mean,
yeah.
Okay,
So-
I'll share a story. So when I moved to Georgia in 71, the university was not integrated until the middle 60s. And so so the kind of courses I was teaching, I was teaching a course on Southern racial politics. And so I got a couple of black kids in my class, and there were very few black students at Georgia at that time. And then I played handball quite a bit. And so I remember playing I went over to the athletic department. The football department had its own facilities, and so a couple of guys, we would go and play handball over there. And I ran into an assistant coach, offensive line coach for Georgia Bulldogs, and they had maybe 2 or 3 black kids on the team at the time. And I asked the question that Ferrick just asked. I said, hear me coming from Southern California. And to be honest with you, do you guys remember Wiley Barnett?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I give you a gold star. He was our what do you call the guys who lived with us in the dorms that were
Okay.
senior classmen?
Dormitorian.
Dormitorian. He was the first black guy that I had ever spent any time with, coming from North Long Beach. I mean, North Long Beach was a working class community. And so what the hell did I know, right? I knew nothing. So I asked this assistant coach, I said, how are you going to start recruiting black players? I said, it seems to me that there's this pool of players. And he said, we have to do it slowly. And this is before Herschel Walker got on campus. But I said, well, I don't understand how you Southerners, and I was a very prejudiced, narrow-minded guy when I went to Georgia. I said, I don't understand how you Southerners can go out and recruit black guys to play basketball because they're 7 feet tall and cheer them on when you won't let them drink out of the drinking fountains, you won't let them, And he said, because, and I'm going to quote this, he said, because there are niggers. There are niggers.
Right.
And it was like what Brian said. It was kind of like the gladiators, is that there was a mentality about sports that they're okay as long as they
stay
know
on
their
the
place.
field.
They stay on the field. They stay on the field. Don't date my daughter. Don't come to my church. But we'll use you for entertainment. Bear Bryant was quoted well after I got to Georgia. The question was, do you ever envision having a black kid play quarterback? And he said, no, it's impossible. He said, there's no way a black person could have the skill sets and the brains to play quarterback. Well, Lou Saban might have a different opinion about that these days, but anyway. And so that's kind of my perspective in essentially a segregated university. And really what happened was that the black students were just really, really good. And they just started changing other students' minds. And it was not because people said, oh, that we're equal, is that the integration of the university led to a lot of interchange between black kids and these white kids coming from South Georgia. So it was a phenomenon that I look back on very fondly. But it was, they're our nigger. I mean, that's exactly what this does, because he's our nigger.
Wow.
Tim, maybe to pull this out of a little bit of a philosophical or political, historical context, but you said that you were very narrow-minded. Did you say racist?
No, oh no. But I had a real severe prejudice against Southern whites.
Ah,
I mean, no. My narrow-mindedness was, like, what in the hell did I do coming down to Athens, Georgia? Because I had this prejudice against Southerners, which I think is kind of a typical California thing.
Yeah.
Well, Tim,
mean,
well,
I
Tim, that
agree.
was your purgatory. You paid your dues. You've
There's
always
no
been bothered
such
by that.
thing, Ferrick.
Brian, we've had a couple of go-rounds about purgatory in our
Dante's
conversation.
Inferno, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we never even got through all of Baron's.
No,
Thing about
we got to get back
purgatory.
on track.
Yeah,
I would like to get back on track on that one.
I think we bailed out at purgatory.
We
Right.
will,
Oh,
we will when the
we-
conversation gets boring. I don't know
Once
what's going to happen.
Once I'm able to think again after this COVID thing, I really would like to get back to Dante.
Yeah,
One thing that puzzles me or intrigues me is how many people who are part of Trump's base are so different. As George was alluding to this, there's not any economic kind of consistency here, but they are, for different reasons, very, very angry because they feel, it appears, that they have not been considered valuable enough to pay attention to or be included in the dynamics of political and educational system. And so all these people who, for whatever reasons, and there are different reasons, feel disaffected because they're not valued, they're not paid attention to, they're outliers, they're on the margins. And so they're really pissed off. And I think lots of them don't relate to Trump in every way that he is, but they do relate to his rebellion and his anger and his division. How is that explained? I mean, how does that work?
So a friend of mine,
yeah.
a friend of mine said that he voted for Trump because he wanted chaos.
He wanted chaos.
He wanted chaos. He wanted chaos. He said, and then I have, through my hospice work, I have the chance to meet with some really, very, very poor people who come into the facility, and they believe that the rich people in this country are Democrats.
Yeah.
And their sense
Not
is that-
entirely
A lot of
untrue.
truth to that.
yeah, and instead of and that the Republican Party is really the party for people who have been ignored.
Yeah, except, just to piggyback on what you're saying, Trump is the last person that will help those people.
Yes.
Of course.
Trump would not want them at his hotel, his golf course.
That's right.
Trump went to school in a chauffeur-driven car to high school, he and his siblings, and he is the last person to really help those people, yet they're all for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's some Jungian archetypal weirdness going on.
Well,
Spoken like a true psychologist.
maybe that, but part of it has just been the lack of class consciousness and the suppression of class consciousness in the United States. right from the beginning. I mean, it relates to the, to the white skin privilege stuff, among, dirt poor white farmers, but, it's been different from Europe and even from parts of Asia. The lack of class consciousness, I think, really confuses things for people. The other side of it is I don't know if this is an exact statistic. I don't know if it's, I don't know if, I think it's that if you look at the breakdown of Democrat and Republican states, voting areas, 70% of the economic productivity of the United States is in Democratic urban areas. And the other 30% is spread out among the rest of the country, so there's those kind of aspects to it also. I don't know, but I think the lack of class consciousness has been a major factor in how this.
I'm not sure what you
Brian,
mean by
how-
that, Brian,
Yeah,
because,
what does that mean, Brian?
yeah, because I think we do have classes. We have
I-
the super rich, we have the Jeffrey Epstein class, we have the type that go to the Trump Hotel, that.
I know we
you
have it. I'm not
Yeah,
saying
there
there's
is class.
Yeah, I'm saying, of course, there's classes. I'm just saying there's not an awareness of classes, right? That in Europe, parts of Europe anyway, you have a very intense class consciousness. I'm a
Right.
worker, you're a bourgeois. I'm a proletarian, you're a bourgeois. But that's
in
been
India,
pretty much
yeah.
suppressed in the United States.
But Brian, what about, say, the period, the progressive period, the Episcopal noblesse oblige, pre-World War I, through the New Deal? Just back to something you said earlier about Americans, it's true. We have this libertarian streak. What do you mean I have to get a vaccine, But I think in the New Deal era, with exceptions, et cetera, obviously, but by and large, there was a sense of commonality during the war. Don't you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to dominate this, but there's two periods. There's the Depression period, the early Depression period, and think about the other thing that was going on globally in that period. Is like just a few years before the Depression set in was the Bolshevik Revolution, which had wide following throughout Europe and also had a significant following within the United States. And so I think a lot of what Roosevelt did was a response on behalf of the capitalist class to kind of, chill out any kind of serious growth of any rebellious forces within the United States. And war always brings people together. We're all fighting on the same side, and you might be in the trenches with a black guy from Georgia and that lives in the same town you do, but when you get back home, you're not going to let them drink from the same drinking fountain. So I think there's
but what broke that down was, to a high degree, was black guys coming back from World War II. LULAC in Texas with the Mexican. I mean, how after World War II, and people, Daniel Inouye, from Hawaii, getting his arm blown away, it'd be very hard to keep him away from your drinking fountain after that. I mean, it was a big factor, don't you think, the war in the civil rights movement?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it took a generation actually, for it to kick in. I mean, it wasn't really until the mid to late 50s, when this, maybe even the early 50s, when the, early civil rights movement, was propelled by people who had that experience.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the Trump supporters think of themselves as a member of a class. They will turn as one person towards the media at a Trump rally and start, shaking their fists and hissing and feeling themselves I guess, inadequately reported in the media or hating the media because they give viewpoints that are different from those of the Trump base. Maybe that's the reason for it. I don't know. I mean, since Wallace at 68, there's been an impatience with any kind of expertise. You know, pointy-headed experts that couldn't park a bicycle straight, remember? And hell, Sarah Palin was a harbinger of all this with her, you know, what, read a briefing paper approach to running for vice president. So it's anti-knowledge. I don't know. I don't know. It's
Fred,
a big deal.
Fred, do you have any stuff from your political theology viewpoint or Habermas or any reflections? Have you been listening to all this?
Well, for the first part of our conversation, I kept remembering Gustav Weigel saying that all things human, given enough time, go badly.
That is a depressing thing.
It's hard to argue against.
That's a hopeful comment.
It isn't very hopeful. But the other thing that struck me about the early part of the conversation went back to the thing I was mentioning the other day, that what Brian talked about liberal individualism goes together with the idea that people in general, it seems to me Americans in general, figure out their humanity and their own identity by what they exclude. So you belong to exclusive neighborhoods, exclusive schools, exclusive whatever it might be. And that's, you stake your identity on that, on who you exclude. So we don't have, and Brian has brought this out beautifully, you don't have the common good, you don't have solidarity, you don't have subsidiarity, and you don't really have responsibility. In other words, what he said about your health is violating my freedom, or whatever the hell it was. All those things are excluded on the basis of me, and my freedom, which is a disoriented freedom, and which isn't actually free. So those are things that I thought about during the earlier part of our discussion. And that's borne out in so many ways about the class consciousness that Brian brought out. I'll never forget how shocked I was when I was a student in Europe for 6 years, of going to train stations and seeing that you had different classes of restaurants, for example. And the third class restaurants were a mess that you didn't feel too good at going into, although your financial status would force you into those things. But that, just the idea of having classes in that sense, which Brian was bringing out, it paralleled for me my experience when I was working in Cofields Parish in South Central LA, and a particular Black family befriended me, and as a gesture of their friendship, they wanted to take me to bullfights in Tijuana. And so we started off in the late in the day, well after lunch. And the idea was to stop for food. And the stop for food was at a Greyhound bus stop, which I had never ever done as a way to go to lunch or dinner. And then at night, we were going to end up going to the bullfight the next day. We went to a motel that I swear I would never have been able to find if I were on my own. And of course, it was a nice motel, but it was run by blacks and so forth and so on. So I got a different picture of what it meant to be black in California, which I thought was pretty relatively fair-minded and so forth, non-racist, but sure enough, we were racist, and we almost couldn't help being racist. And so those kinds of experiences made a lot of difference to me. I had a grad student who was a wonderful, still is a wonderful person. She's retired now from BC, where she became a professor. Her name was Sean Copeland. And in the earlier days of her career, she was a sister, a Dominican sister. And she told me she had a position in Pittsburgh in a parish, not officially connected to the parish, but she said she had the experience then of being at the communion rail and the priest just passed her by and didn't give her communion. So more and more, I noticed in solidarity with my student, this constant drumbeat, so to speak, of racism. And now what really irritates me is the idea that critical race theory is taught in the schools, and that it shouldn't be taught in the schools because it makes the children feel uncomfortable. Well, I would say it's a good idea to feel uncomfortable at that age, rather than just live in comfort for the rest of your life, not in any way acknowledging what's happened to all those people who are different from you. And so, that's a thing I noticed. The overwhelming thing, though, definitely has so much to do with economics. That our capitalist system of economics has never really understood how economies work in such a way that it is exaggerated now by the financialization and globalization of the economy, in which the so-called shareholder interests are everything, and the poor people who are in favor of Trump are screwed. But in some ways, all of us are by those rich people. Just because we're living in this kind of society in which we don't know how to talk to each other. We don't really know how to understand each other's gripes and problems, but also just the sheer thing of last decade or so, never hearing the word hate so much. And it doesn't matter which side, so to speak, is talking. They both say they hate the other side. And I don't remember that from my youth. What I do remember, though, about Brian was when we were talking together a few times during when we were in the seminary together, he started sending letters to his family. And he had a gradual thing of addressing his letter with less and less information on the letter, till eventually he came to the thing of having nothing but their names on the letter. then I left the seminary and went on to leave the seminary just before. I remember Gary talking about permanent subdiaconate. Well, I missed subdiaconate, but I found out it's not permanent anymore.
Oh, isn't even an order anymore, no.
It's not. Oh,
No.
oh, okay.
Where did you go after you left the Gregorian College in Rome?
Well, everything in my life changed utterly when I was sent to Rome. I realized that sometimes in working in parishes before I worked with Father Rowan and Father Cofield, I would be in parishes where I would take census because of the idea that a parish, the geographical extent of the parish meant that everybody in that parish was in your parish.
Okay.
So you take census of everybody. And in upper middle class or middle class parishes, a lot of the people were immensely well educated. And so they were adults in their field in terms of what they knew, but they were little kids in terms of what they knew about their faith or their theology. So whether they were Catholic or not, they would ask me questions. And I started to realize I had no way of answering their questions. And what we were doing in the seminary wasn't any help whatsoever. And so I started really, that was in a way the beginning of my intellectual life, when my class, you may recall, when we got to the stage where it was just one class rather than several classes, everybody in the class got an A, and I was one of them. But I remember going out with a fellow named David Holzgang.
I remember him.
Mhm.
We were on a walk and we said, everybody in the class gets an A, but an awful lot of those people don't seem to be so smart. And it's because you could be a good student without being
Smart.
really a good mind. And the good minds are asking questions in a way that the others aren't. And so you got into conversations with people like Brian, who wasn't that way, and many others. And you enjoyed going on your walks with them for two reasons. On the one hand, they were curious about stuff, and on the other hand, they were funnier than the other people. And
Curious and funny.
I think it goes together. So,
Sure.
When I went to Rome, the theology was different, mainly in the sense that before I went to Rome, I already had read Insight. And on the boat going over with my class from all over the States, there pretty soon people found out who had read Insight and not who hadn't. And it was there that I was informed that Lonergan was at the Greg. I noticed later, and I never looked at these things, but it said on the cover of the Insight that I had bought at Horan's bookstore or religious equipment store, whatever it was.
No.
I stumbled across that book, and I was startled because I had all sorts of questions in philosophy which our philosophy, neither our professors nor our textbooks could answer. And so I went to the library and I was trying to find things that would help me answer these questions. And I stumbled across in theological studies a series of essays by Lonergan on verbum in Thomas Aquinas. And
So is that at St. John's Seminary
yeah, that was a
College? Yeah, okay.
So we had a wonderful system of reading at meals. And I realized that was even before St. John's, I should say. The reading at meals and at, I think it was less frequent at St. John's. But what I did was I made index cards of all the articles. And during reading, which I couldn't hear anyway, I would study those cards. And if you had the questions, it helped to realize what you were understanding there was something that you were never taught in any of our classes. So it was a delight for me to realize that Lonergan was there. And I had a lot of questions that we asked at that I asked people at meals in my early days at the North American College. And finally, a couple of the guys said, well, if you wonder about these things, why don't you just go ask Lonergan? And I never dreamt of doing so. I would have never knocked on anybody's door that way. But luckily, very early in my time there, the guys who met the bus were two great Lonergan scholars. One was David Tracy at the University of Chicago, Catholic U before, and the other one was Joe Kamanchak, who taught ecclesiology at Catholic U. They both were not only Lonergan scholars, but they were guys from New York who would go up and knock on anybody's door at any time. So they encouraged me to go ahead and do it. So I did. And luckily I did, because Lonergan had to leave during my third year. So I left the year after Brian left, realizing that because I had questions and because our Latin was pretty good, I could understand the lectures at the Greg, which were in Latin, and I could read the textbooks, which were in Latin. And so when people started to come to me who weren't so hot at Latin and needed help, they'd come again and again, and I'd have really reading sessions with them. And I realized, geez, I have all these questions. And I think really maybe what the church wants me to do is ask and answer these questions. And I realized, having worked with people like Father Cofield and Father Rowan, that you could never be that kind of priest if you really were going to study. So I thought maybe that was my vocation, to be a teacher and to study. So I realized then, because of conversations with Lonergan, again and again, I would ask him questions, and he'd ask me, did you read some book in German? And what I could say is that, well, I knew Spanish, and the Spaniards were crazy about the Germans, and they've made pretty good translations of some of these works, but not all of them. So it was clear to me when I realized I wanted to be a theologian, in a sense, philosopher and theologian. If I was going to be serious about theology, I should know the German context. And so I went it was on the last session of the council, I met up with Lucas Fisher, who was the head of the World Council of Churches. And I told him what I wanted to do. And I asked him, where do you think I should go? And he had gone to the University of Basel, which was a Barthian bailiwick. And he said, why don't you go there? So I said, okay. And so I met Sue in the later days of that third year, my wife, the third year of theology by God's providence. And we fell in love and got married in the States. And David Tracy, who was teaching at Catholic University at the time, gave us tickets back to Basel so that I could go study at Basel. And we spent 6 happy years in Europe together. And I realized when I came back that because I had done that, I found myself being in something like the same kind of position that I had been earlier in the seminary. I knew a lot more than a lot of these people, partly because I did my dissertation on a philosopher and Lonergan. I was going to do it on the philosopher who's named Hans-Georg Gadamer, kind of an epigon of Heidegger, but not nuts and not a crypto Nazi. And that was quite a thing. And I took my dissertation proposal to my doctor father, as they called him there. And he said, this is wonderful, Herr Lawrence, but ist das Theologie? And I had to admit, no, it's pretty philosophical, although it's important for theology. So I ended up doing a dissertation on 2 people, which means doing 2 dissertations in one. And that was a great exercise and help. So anyway, that's roughly my early life. And I must say, the stream of questions never dries up. And it goes into all sorts of areas. So the political theology idea was fateful for me because a Cistercian or Trappist who was in Rome with me got the bug of leaving the Trappists and becoming a professor. And he went to the University of Münster to do his dissertation, where Johann Baptist Metz, who was really the center of what was called political theology in Europe, liberation theology in Latin America, was. And so and Habermas, of course, was very interested in politics, Frankfurt School, and critical theory, ideology critique, and so forth. And I read all his works, and he had actually, I got into him because he had the 2 guys that were in charge of his dissertation at the Frankfurt School, University of Frankfurt, weren't going to accept his dissertation on Schelling. So he went to Heidelberg, and Gadamer said, took him under his wing, and in a certain sense persuaded Teddy Adorno and Horkheimer that this is a good dissertation, pass it. And so he became a friend of Gadamer's, and he was critical of Gadamer, of course. And because of that connection, I got into the political theology climate at that time and brought it back to the States with me. So that's more or less it.
Are you still asking questions?
Oh, yes.
Will
Yeah.
they keep
Giving the
coming?
answers. So how's the answers coming?
The answers are tremendously difficult. In other words, how do you really have an economics that supports the common good, solidarity, subsidiarity, and responsibility? You can't be responsible. I always remember this wonderful quote by Charlie Barr. I don't know which year it came up, but he said, confidence is that feeling you have before you really understand the situation.
Really did sound like him. didn't it?
I'm less confident now, but I'm finding more and more about the situation.
Yeah.
And you do that by having questions occur to you and following up if you can.
You know, I want to just tell you a Charlie Barr story. He was at the same, he was up in Ojai, California, in a, you know, rest home, or, you know, it wasn't retirement, you know, people that needed some help. And Kevin Bray was there also. So I would go up and visit Kevin periodically. And I remember the first time I realized that Charlie Barr was there, I went over to visit him, right? And, you know, he was kind of fairly senile at that point. He wasn't totally all there, but still Charlie Barr, you know. And I always remembered him as this crazy guy, you know what I mean? You never knew what he was going to do next, but he seemed to be fully in charge and just provoking you every way he could. But I said to him, I said, you know, Charlie, I said, I have to tell you this. I said, you're the best professor, your best teacher I ever had. And he just started crying. And it was so moving to me, you know, and I was so glad that I said that to him, because he was in his own, I mean, I don't know, everybody has different experiences, but for me, he was the best, you know, most effective teacher I ever had. And I just love the guy in retrospect, you know.
And do any of you have these memories of Charlie Barr, such as I have, of his talking to the electrician? You know, he would talk to the people at the seminary. He was connected with the people,
Sure.
you know, and he would come back and tell stories about what he learned from talking to the electrician out who was working out in the seminary or something. So I remember him as that type of person.
Yeah.
A true
Remind
communist.
me in high school, what courses did he teach us?
Spanish.
Driver's ed.
Driver's ed.
Oh, he driver's ed.
You
Yep.
see me, I
Always,
remember
always
that.
keep your eye on the cars around you.
I see you.
I see you, you
remember-
see me, and I have a place to go. Remember that?
Yep, yeah.
We both have a
Now-
place to go.
And I
I can put a face with the name.
I'm
I
gonna
had
get
a
paid
good
for the tent. He would
I had the
say,
good fortune of being the dormitory in the junior seminary. And on weekends, all the freshmen would go home.
Yeah.
And Charlie Barr was the priest who was
on the floor.
in his room near where I was. And we would talk until late in the night. I really had a high esteem for him.
Yeah.
He was interested in so many different things, but also especially in education. He said that the thing that got him going was an article in the Italian encyclopedia on a Italian educator named Vittorino da Feltri. And when I learned Italian, I read that article, and I could see he was greatly affected by Vittorino. But he was a wonderful person.
Yeah.
He was a
he
character.
so was. You know, my earliest memories of him, I was thinking about it the other day. was here we were, ninth graders, suddenly in the seminary, all of a sudden you'd have mass and somebody knock on a pew and everybody start moving. And
Yeah, yeah.
how weird is this shit, And but I remember going down to the refectory or coming back for breakfast, and here is this guy gliding along the wall.
Gliding along the wall, yes.
And he looked like a combination of Abraham Lincoln and Bela Lugosi to me, Lincoln and Dracula. And
That's quite a synthesis. That's quite a synthesis.
Well, yeah. And if you would bump into him or something, he was, you would disturb his momentum because he was clearly lost in prayer and he was going to keep it up all the way down to the faculty dining room. And that's why he was skimming along the wall. And yet, if you would bump into him, he'd stop and he'd register, okay, impediment, and smile. He would smile warily and, how can I put it? Keeping himself out of a full exchange with you by smiling, no real eye contact or anything, but he didn't want to scare you either, and I don't know how he did it, but it was just, remember Ned, when we went and visited Father Franz, he,
I was going to mention that when I've got so many memories of Father Barr, but when George and I went to stay with Father Franz, I don't know, what was it, a week, George?
That was at least 3 or 4 days. This was in 2016.
And we
down in New Orleans.
We asked him about Charlie Barr. And
we asked him about all those guys. What'd you think of B.J. McCoy? What'd you think of
and he was very candid. But what he said about Charlie was he never said one untoward thing about any of the seminarians. They had meetings wherein they discussed the students. And he never said anything negatively. He said things that were positive, and positive in two ways. He would recognize good things in the students, and he would suggest ways of bringing out even better things out of the students, but never anything that was critical in a negative way. And it just to me, he was at one point the spiritual director for most of our class, and I remember seeing him fairly often because I had a lot of economic and social and other kinds of issues.
Yeah, you were weird.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
I was very, very weird. Oh, no. And he would listen. He would listen so gently, but intently. And he understood what I was telling him. I was talking with him about things that frightened me and made me angry and puzzled me. And it was from, I think, a very unique point of view, because he would tell me that. And he would explain connections and ask me to be patient with people and even the professors, because they were still growing, and most of them wanted to grow, and they would at some point or another recognize that I wasn't all that different from them, except that there was a cultural thing that was beginning to merge with the culture of the seminary on my part. And he did more for me to segue my mind and my spirit into the environment of the seminary and the culture of the seminarians. And he was just such a valuable sine qua non for me. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but without him, I don't know what I would have done. There were times when he would reach over and hug me and just hug me. And I would hug back, and we, 2-3 minutes that way. And there was nothing in the least strange about it. It was simple. I'm with you. I love you. Trust me. I trust you. You're very, very, very good person. And I'd walk out of there both in tears sometimes, but they were very happy tears. What a guy.
I have something much less profound to say about him. I remember it was probably about senior year of high school. I had really, it was clear to me that I really wanted to speak profanely. I wanted to, what the fuck, and stuff. I wanted to talk like the guys that I worked with in the factory in the summer, and I didn't see any reason not to. And I remember saying to him in spiritual direction, Father, really, what's wrong with swearing and being profane? I mean, why is that so bad? And he says, well, George, I can't say it's sinful, but let me tell you this. And now, Brian, you can remember the block I lived on, and Tim maybe, and Ned, you said.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And he said, well, guys that talk like that, George, typically they grew up on some street, and down at the bottom of the street, there's a railroad track. And over across the railroad track, there are all these factories. And then if you go the other direction, behind their house, there's a river in which people dump industrial waste. And on the other side of the river are more factories, and maybe there's a freeway there. And I said, Father, that's my block.
Yeah.
And I don't remember his reaction, but I'll never forget the description.
I gotta jump in. I have to do a funeral. So I have really loved this. This is wonderful. Thank you.
We love you, Gary.
Great to see you, Gary, after all
Great
these
to see
years.
you. Great to see
conversation.
all of you.
Ned, I gotta compliment you on having your Christmas tree still up, because the Christmas ends on Sunday with the feast of the baptism of the Lord. And so you're still celebrating it. And Tim, I'll think of you on Monday night when Georgia and Alabama clash.
Hey, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyway, Brian, it's great to see you. I mean,
Same here. Same
what
here.
a treat. What a treat. What a great day this has been. Thank you, all of you. Thank you very much.
God bless you, Gary.
I gotta go.
Take good care, Gary. God bless
Hi,
you.
Gary.
Brian,
Doing good
what is
things.
your phone number?
917-701-4281.
And do that again.
917-701-4281.
And Brian, do you keep in contact with Joe DeMassa?
I do actually. Who now goes by the name of Cowboy Joe, but
Cowboy Joe.
Sounds like some gay moniker,
No. Sounds
Yeah.
consistent
From
with
the
yeah,
bathhouse.
actually interesting, Joe. He and Maria bought a property up near San Bernardino, up in the mountains someplace, that they turned into a camp for kids And so he ran that for, at least part-time and then maybe full-time
Yeah.
for quite a while. I think his daughter runs it now. But yeah, so I see him periodic, when I go out to he lives in Pasadena. So, and I usually go stay with my brother in Sierra Madre. So I usually try to hook up with Joe for a little while I'm out there.
Yeah, he and his wife are in Sicily now visiting.
Yeah, their total identification with Southern Italy and the islands,
Yeah.
Sicily is an unbelievable place.
Yeah, it is. I just wanted to make a comment off of what Fred was saying that just on the question of mentorship and
Quick, where's Gremer?
huh?
Nothing, it was an in joke.
Oh,
Never
no,
mind.
but
Well,
like,
yeah, this is interesting because Gremer is very much enthusiastic about the concept of mentorship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
He keeps grilling us all about who our
There's
mentors are.
there's an understatement.
And he also,
haven't experienced that or might not have brought it up, but anyway,
Yeah.
but
but he
You
also
would
dropped
be.
out of this conversation because he was having connection difficulties
uh,
with his internet and he
That's-
hasn't been able to join us.
A shame.
So go ahead, mentor, Brian.
no, I was just, listening to the people that influenced you, Fred, I think Cofield was probably the most significant person that directed where my life ended up, but the other thing you said that, I think part of playing that role for people is having the ability to listen to people's questions or to listen to what they're saying. And this goes back to that discussion about, the Trump world and all of that stuff. I mean, I think it is important to try and listen to people to see where they're coming from and why, and not just, write them off. I mean, you may eventually have to pull out your AK-47 and deal with them, but in the meantime, I think, there's this great quote from Mao is that we should use the weapon of criticism until we can use criticism by weapons. But I do think that there's a lot that we don't understand about what's going on in this country and in the world for that matter, and why people are taking the positions that they do. And, a lot of these are kind of ancient questions probably, but they all get conditioned by the current world that we live in. So that's kind of been my experience. A good friend of mine, he was a plumber up in Lenox who died this year because he kind of didn't take his cancer seriously enough, but he was a hardcore Trump guy and a gun guy, made his own bullets and all this kind of stuff. But we had the greatest discussions, and he used to come over, Barbara would say to him, if you come to do a plumbing job, I'm only paying you for the time you're actually working. You don't get paid for the time you and Brian are talking. And, but
Yeah.
I actually learned quite a bit from him, and I think he learned a lot from me, but I don't know, that's just one, that curiosity, like why the hell do people think the way they do? That curiosity question, I think, is because you can't develop your own theories, or certainly can't teach anybody unless you kind of listen to what they're thinking,
It's
That's just
interesting.
one comment I had off of what Fred was saying.
Just to piggyback on that, Brian and Fred and all of us, is just the chance meetings. You said that woman said you were overeducated and underskilled. And it sounds like that influenced your whole life. That was a fork in the road.
Yeah.
And Fred, the fact that Dave Tracy and Kamanchek met you at the bus, and the fact that you stumbled across those essays at the seminary, by Lonergan. I didn't, how did you find out about insight? Oops. I'm gone here.
No,
Oh, yeah. We can
Oh,
see.
oh,
You're not- no, you're
Yeah, my
good.
screen is gone. Okay. But the fact that you stumbled across Insight and read it, and then that, it's like, aren't our lives amazing how chance meetings stepping stones and people. And Fred, you were a mentor to me. I was one of the ones that Lonergan was gone, so I didn't have his class, but it was through you and your kind of peeling back the understanding that made Rome the experience it was for me. So I thank you for that, and Sue also. So it's all, we're one of a piece, we're all kind of a mosaic, it seems.
Mhm, mhm. There's also one other thing that has always struck me, or at least for a long, long time. And that is, Brian, you ask in so many unique ways why and how, and Fred and all of us do. And it seems to me that there is an internal structure, psychological structure, that that promotes accepting certain things and rejecting certain things, and we try to come up with justifications for those things that we accept, and for those things that we don't. And it's almost, it's an instinctual thing rather than a rational thing. And sometimes we get into arguments with folks and we really don't know how to, if I'm honest with myself, I really don't know how to substantially justify my leanings or my beliefs. There has to be one faith in someone and in this structure that appeals to me. And I noticed that that's the same thing with other folks who think differently. They have faith in their internal predisposed structure, and in people who represent that for them, and it's not a matter of knowing everything. It's accepting in faith a whole lot of stuff, much of which is so divergent, so different from one another. And somehow we've got to, we do, this is an example of it. We do care for each other and respect each other, but think so differently sometimes. And it's okay.
Amen.
Amen.
It's
Yeah, a lot of
12:30.
stuff-
We've been going for 2.5 hours.
Okay, let's call it.
My gosh.
Sure went fast.
There's a lot to catch up with after 60 years. Well, you said 60, Tom, but I don't think it was 60 years yet.
Well, pretty close for me because, you've been in touch with some others here, but whatever. it
Just
is.
let me, I've got to go, but Brian, the last time I saw you was you went to these guys' ordination. And afterwards, when these guys got ordained, you went
Oh,
to
yeah.
the ordination.
Yeah.
And my wife and I were there. And afterwards, we went to Alhambra to your parents' house. And that's the last time I remember seeing
Oh,
you.
really?
And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and that would have been 68. So what's that, Tom, 54 years?
54, yeah.
Yeah.
54. Amazing. So I've got to go.
Okay, guys.
Okay.
Well, this
Well,
is really great. I'm so glad to see you all again.
God bless you, Brian.
good to see you, and God bless you all. And by the way, Brian, I will, before the end of the day, we'll send you the link to the to the recording in case you should happen to want to, go back and check out anything.
Okay. All
But
right.
you need to tell him that
Some
Fred-
people
Fred-
take, in our group, Brian, take what we say seriously and
Yeah.
listen to tapes.
Yeah.
I
Hey,
can't
George
see it,
Crook,
but
Crook, can you call me?
yeah, sure. Be happy to.
Okay. Goodbye, guys.
Tim?
Bye, everyone.
Tim, what's
Here,
what's your telephone number, Tim?
561.
I'll get it from George. Take it.
Okay.
I think
All right.
Tom sent out a
It's on the
list.
paper that I
Yeah,
sent
that's
out.
right. That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And
Except you have to
Fred,
sign the paper.
Fred, I'm
thank
glad you could
Tim.
join today.
And
Oh, you didn't have class?
Brian, I just want to know if you could walk to Central Park.
yes, I can in 2 blocks.
Oh, my God.
All right. Have fun, everyone. I'm pressing the button right now.